Since September 1980, Iran and Iraq have been at war. A year and a half later, there is no winner, no loser, only stalemate. At times, it has been a war forgotten by the West. A young Iranian soldier pleads his cause to a visiting French reporter.
The only thing that I wish is that the word of these people, what these people say, we want them to be heard by the French people. This is what we want to happen. I mean, these people here, these people who come here to fight, they just, they've left their families. They've left their houses. Just they want to come here just to fight the Iraqis. But your country is now helping Iraq, right? But why? You see these people? How old is he? How old is this guy? Must be 14 or something. But he's come here to fight. He's left his mother, he's left his father.
These Iranian soldiers believe they are fighting for a cause, their country and Islam. But they're also fighting the nation of Iraq, a country they see as a deadly enemy.
Your government helping a country who's forfeiting his soldiers to come and fight us.
The outbreak of hostilities followed years of border skirmishes over the Iran-Iraq boundary. Relations between Iraq and Iran deteriorated significantly after the Iranian Islamic Revolution and the departure of the Shah in February 1979. In 1980, as border incidents increased, allegations of aggression flew back and forth between Baghdad and Tehran. Finally, full-scale fighting broke out when the Iraqis launched an offensive on September 22, 1980. At the beginning of the conflict, the disputed area centered on the Shatt al-Arab waterway opening onto the Gulf. But very quickly, the fighting spread north along the border and into Iranian territory. By mid-November, it seemed that the conflict would become a long war of attrition. Neither side had fully committed all its available forces to the fighting, and it soon became clear that the prospect of a prolonged conflict caused concern to Western nations. They feared the effect such a war would have on the flow of oil out of Iran and Iraq. They also feared that an escalation of the conflict might, in turn, involve other Middle Eastern countries. After their initial push, the Iraqis were halted in their advance. The Iraqi army met with several problems. They encountered strong Iranian resistance and failed to come to terms with modern warfare, particularly in the mountainous and swampy areas of fighting. As a result, Iraqi casualties were high, very high. Western sources estimated Iraqi losses to be 10,000 dead and 20,000 wounded by the end of the first year's fighting. But loss of life has been heavy on both sides. Mass graves like this one are scattered throughout the battle areas. One recent battle area where renewed intense fighting has recently increased the death toll is in and around the town of Desfoul. Here, late in March, the Iranian army inflicted a resounding defeat on the Iraqis. After a 6-day campaign, the Iranian forces recaptured hundreds of square miles of territory and almost destroyed the Iraqi Fourth Army. The Iraqi forces were expecting the Iranian operation, but were not prepared for their tactics. And Iraq, despite its superiority in weapons, could not resist the Iranian push. Thousands of young Iranian soldiers swarmed across the enemy positions and, advancing in a pincher movement, cut off Iraqi troops in the area. Certain observers believed the Iraqi front would crumble as a result. It almost did. Thousands of Iraqi soldiers were captured and many were wounded. But despite the setback, Iraq's forces have regrouped and the front has stabilized. Iranian soldiers pray their thanks to Allah for their success and mourn their fellow soldiers. The charred remains of a radar dish stand as a testimony to the fighting and the destruction that took place here. Look back now to September 1980 and the first scenes of this unresolved conflict. These were some of the first pictures of Iranian troops reeling under the initial Iraqi attack. The fiercest fighting was concentrated around the disputed Shatt al-Arab waterway. In 1975, the Shah concluded a new treaty with Iraq, moving the boundary from the Iranian shore to the center of the deepest channel. But there was widespread opposition inside Iraq to this concession. Once the war started, the Iraqis lost no time in seizing the port city of Khorramshahr, known to them as Muhammara, and shelling Abadan. The early weeks of the war saw Iraqi advances along most of the front line, but the war was soon to visit Baghdad too. Baghdad is well within the range of Iran's American-built F-4 Phantom fighter bombers, a legacy of the Shah's regime, which was now helping to defend the revolution. The Iranian pilots were instructed to attack oil storage tanks in Baghdad in retaliation for the shelling of Iran's oil complex at Abadan. Two of the world's major oil producers were trying to destroy each other's main source of wealth. With the beginning of winter 1980 and the onset of the rainy season, a military stalemate had been reached. President Saddam Hussein had not won the quick victory he had hoped for, but he encouraged his people to fight on to a finish and his soldiers to cut off the hands of the aggressive backers of Khomeini. Saddam Hussein found his own backers among the conservative Gulf states and in Jordan's King Hussein.
Iraq is fighting the battle of its own rights and the battle of the entire area there. Iraq is a country that has demonstrated in terms of its people, time and again, that it is with all Arabs. Whenever there is a conflict, whenever there is a struggle, it's demonstrated that time and again on our soil, on Syrian soil, on Palestinian soil. Flare-up after flare-up occurred without hesitation, without questioning. They rushed to help, and they fell, and they died, and they gave sacrifices, and they struggled and shared with us and with Arabs their struggles. They're fighting our battle, and we are fighting with them our battle as well. The battle of the future of this Arab nation, of the retention of the Arab identity, Arab freedom, the Arab right to live on Arab soil in dignity.
Khomeini is seen by the two Husseins as an enemy of the Arabs, a view made clear at this display in Baghdad of captured Iranian weapons. But by no means did all Arabs come out in favor of Iraq. Syria and Libya, for instance, powerful voices in the Arab world, have supported Iran. Colonel Gaddafi branded Saddam as a stooge of the West an enemy of the fundamentalist Islamic revolution that Khomeini had started. And Syria was motivated by its long-standing political disagreements with Iraq's Ba'athist leadership. The diplomatic war was now assuming as much importance as the military confrontation. Each side presented its case to anyone who would listen, but the widespread view at the United Nations, as expressed in a unanimous Security Council resolution, was that both sides should stop fighting immediately and settle their dispute by peaceful means. The superpowers maintained a position of strict neutrality and were unable or unwilling to impose an end to the fighting. The war dragged on into the new year. The initial euphoria in Baghdad was dampened when Iraqi casualties began to mount. Besides its long-range air raids, Iran claimed to have started a big counteroffensive in January 1981. Iraq said it had repelled all attacks, but confirmed that large-scale fighting was taking place. Each side claimed to have killed around 2,000 of the enemy in a major battle. The casualties were mounting on both sides, but the resolve of the rival leaderships in Tehran and Baghdad remained unshaken. Iran flatly refused to start peace talks while Iraq occupied any of its territory, and a military withdrawal was seen by Saddam Hussein as tantamount to defeat. The war and the suffering continued. Mediation efforts at the United Nations had failed to produce results. Perhaps the mullahs in Tehran would be more inclined to listen to the leaders of other Muslim countries, grouped together in the Islamic Conference Organization. One of the main ICO proposals has been a truce supervised by a non-Arab Muslim peacekeeping force. There should be a pullback of Iraqi forces and ICO-sponsored talks on the future of the Shatt al-Arab. However, the Islamic proposals have not proved acceptable to Iran, and mediation efforts by the non-aligned movement and the PLO have met with a similar fate. Physically, Tehran is a long way from the front, 400 kilometers from the main battle areas and separated by mountain ranges. On the surface, the city has retained an air of normality, with no obvious sign that the country is gripped in a debilitating war. It is much quieter than in the days of street battles before and after the 1979 revolution, but all Iranians have constant reminders of the war, not only through the media, but by the changes in their everyday life. The Iranian economy has for long years been fueled by its oil industry, and production peaked in the months before the fall of the Shah at over 6 million barrels a day. Output has fallen to an average of 1 million barrels a day. Self-sufficiency, rationing, and all-round belt-tightening are now the order of the day as the country struggles to live on a reduced income while paying for a war costing about $250 million a month. Even without the war, the economy was destined for radical changes. The doubling of agricultural land for homegrown produce was one of the early revolutionary decrees. Iran must break its dependence on foreign imports, and encouraging the small farmer fits in nicely with the ideals of the Islamic fundamentalists. That is, the traditional village life must be encouraged, and the population drift from the countryside to the industrial centers must be halted. It reflects a typically Iranian fusion of economic thinking and religious principles. The emphasis on religion does not appeal to all Iranians. This is the funeral in March this year of Hajjat al-Islam Mohammad Salem Hasni, the head of political ideology. His name is added to the long list of religious figures assassinated by the left-wing Mujahideen, who took part in the fight to depose the Shah, but whose long-term aim was to create a socialist and secular state. The assassination was a grim reminder of the stunning bomb explosion in June 1981 at the Islamic Republican Party headquarters. Then 72 people died, including Ayatollah Beheshti, regarded at the time as the second most powerful man in the country. But the latest killing was a comparatively isolated incident. A wave of arrests and executions followed, and the Amnesty International organization says that 4,000 people are known to have gone before the firing squads since Ayatollah Khomeini came to power. Opposition sources claim the total death toll has now reached 13,000. With the opposition driven off the streets, all demonstrations are in support of the Khomeini leadership. This march is part of a Women's Day celebration, and taking part are thousands of typical post-revolutionary Iranian women. They wear the head veil of Islam, the chador, when they venture outside their homes. Though strictly religious, the women are politically committed as well. They turn their anger on the symbol of Khomeini's great Satan. This demonstration was by a group of Iraqi expatriates. They have responded to Iran's insistence that the war is against Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist regime, not against the Iraqi people. The Iranian appeals are addressed to Iraq's Shia Muslim population, which forms the main political opposition to the Saddam Hussein regime. The Shias have formed their own guerrilla groups, but have been kept in close check by the Iraqi security forces. That's why many have sought refuge across the border. The exiles are made welcome here, and they play a useful role in the propaganda war. According to the Khomeini ideal, the Islamic Revolution should have no borders. As the war continues, Iran has a constant and unwanted source of more propaganda. It's young men who have died and who are hailed in a mixture of grief and religious fervor as national martyrs. According to Islamic teaching, those who die defending their faith all achieve martyrdom. They are the honored dead and are guaranteed a place in paradise. The religious fervor, the readiness to die, was seen in the early days of the revolution, when young, unarmed people defied the tanks and guns of the Shah's security forces. Now the Pasdaar, the Revolutionary Guards, and the Bajis, volunteers, are fighting alongside the armed forces. Their faith gives them added courage in battle, but it also makes them more exposed to Iraqi bullets. The most recent Iranian advances reportedly saw young recruits being used in human waves, even marching through minefields without a second thought. Such fanaticism could explain the heavy losses in manpower the Iranians suffered during their counter-offensive, bringing yet more mourners to the awe-inspiring burial ground called Behesht Zara, the place of the martyrs. This is one of the first places which Khomeini made a point of visiting when he returned from exile over 3 years ago. The cemetery has grown a lot since then. Side by side with victims of the Shah's regime lie the hundreds of assassinated Khomeini supporters and the thousands of volunteers and soldiers who have now fallen in the war with Iraq. Despite war casualties and despite purges of officer ranks after the revolution, Iran's armed forces, to the dismay of the Iraqis, seem to be growing stronger rather than weaker. crisis in relations with the West as a result of the United States hostages episode created a great problem regarding spare parts for tanks and aircraft. But Iranian technicians, with help from friendly countries, have managed to keep most of the hardware operational. Another factor has been the emergence of a new generation of commanders who have broken away from the style of Western-trained officers. They are ready to use unconventional tactics centered on their new weapon, determined Islamic militias. The heady mixture of nationalism and religion, as at this parade on the 3rd anniversary of the revolution, can color a soldier's judgment. But recent successes on the battlefield give the Iranians solid grounds for optimism, too. As in all wars, there is a price in human suffering to be paid. But selfless sacrifice has become a hallmark, not only of the revolution, but also of the war against Iraq. The desire to win the war burns as strongly as ever here, and some observers predict another Iranian offensive in the coming weeks. Iraq is bracing itself, but this time will be better prepared too. Meanwhile, thousands of Iraqi prisoners remain captive in Iranian hands. Iran has an estimated 20,000 Iraqi prisoners of war, while Iraq holds half that number POWs. Here at the Paranda military base, almost 10,000 Iraqi prisoners were paraded in front of the Iranian Chief of Staff and the Western media. Portraits of Ayatollah Khomeini were distributed to the prisoners, and they were lectured on the sanctity of the Islamic Revolution. Many Iraqi prisoners are allegedly becoming converts to the Iranian cause. But Iranian leaders claim they do not intend to spread their revolution by force, only to show the correctness of their cause by peaceful persuasion. Iran's leaders believe the prisoners will carry the message of the Islamic Revolution home with them. Possibly because of this, Iraq has been reluctant to consider an exchange of prisoners. But not all Iraqi POWs want to listen to Iran's interpretation of Islam. Some still maintain their political and national beliefs. These prisoners of war have become propaganda pawns. They are mostly soldiers serving in the Iraqi army. Nationals from Jordan, Lebanon, Sudan, and other Arab nations are also reputed to be here.
To my knowledge, there are some from
which countries?
different Arab countries, from Sudan or Jordan and Lebanon.
There are allegations that some of them have been forced to enlist in the Iraqi army. But this Sudanese soldier told us some volunteer because they want to help Iraq in the war against Iran.
All Egyptians who
Now
were
they
here
wait to see what fate lies ahead
must
in
go
a
to
war
fight.
that is dragging on and mostly forgotten around the world. Meanwhile, in Tehran, as in Baghdad, the propaganda offensive continues. Slogans to boost morale are painted on buildings, constant reminders of an ongoing revolution and a war without apparent end. Faith, holy war, martyrdom. The people of Iran are urged to become the soldiers of Islam. They see it as a holy war, a battle between right and wrong, good and evil. The Iranians believe Allah to be on their side. Many of them think that through death and martyrdom, Iran will never lose and certainly never surrender. But neither country can back out or afford to lose a war that may decide their future. And until peace comes, the soldiers will continue to die.
These guys are going to fight. The weapons, the French weapons, are killing these guys. The French Mirage, they're killing these guys. This is what's happening. This is where we